Building a house has always been much more than just a machine for living in. There is a concept of feng shui, where orientation of windows and doors and objects can help with the flow of ki through the building to make it a more pleasant place to be in. Individuals like Frank Lloyd Wright and his associates have done remarkable, if by some standards rather odd, things with this idea. But sometimes experimentation can go a little too far. And he built a crooked house by Robert Heinlin. Read by Carl Wallace. Americans are considered crazy anywhere in the world. They usually concede a basis for the accusation, but point to California as the focus of the infection. Californians stoutly maintain that their bad reputation derives solely from the acts of the inhabitants of Los Angeles County. Angelina does well, when pressed, admit the charge, but explain hastily, "It's Hollywood. It's not our fault. We didn't ask for it. Hollywood just grew." The people in Hollywood don't care. They glory in it. If you're interested, they'll drive you up Laurel Canyon, where we keep the violent cases. The Canyonites, the brown-legged women, the trunks-clad men, constantly building and rebuilding their slap-happy unfinished houses, regard with faint contempt the dull creatures who live down the flats, and treasure in their hearts the secret knowledge that they, and only they, know how to live. Lookout Mountain Avenue is the name of a side canyon which twists up from Laurel Canyon. The other Canyonites don't like to have it mentioned. After all, one must draw the line somewhere. High up on Lookout Mountain, at number 8755, across the street from the Hermit, the original Hermit of Hollywood, lives Quintus Teal, graduate architect. Even the architecture of Southern California is different. Hot dogs are sold from a structure built like and designated the Pup. Ice cream cones come from a giant stucco ice cream cone, and the owner proclaims, "Get the chili bowl habit," for the rules of building which are indisputably chili bowls. Gasoline, oil, and free road maps are dispensed beneath the wings of tri-motored transport planes, while the certified restrooms, inspected hourly for your comfort, are located on the cabin of the plane itself. These things may surprise or amuse the tourist, but the local residents, who walk bareheaded in the famous California noonday sun, take it as a matter of course. Quintus Teal regarded the efforts of his colleagues in architecture as faint, bumbling, and timid. "What is a house?" Teal demanded of his friend Homer Bailey. "Well," Bailey admitted cautiously, speaking in broad terms, "always regard a house as a gadget to keep off the rain." "Nuts. You're as bad as the rest of them. Didn't say the definition was complete." "Complete? Isn't even in the right direction. From that point of view, I might as well be squatting in caves. But I don't blame you," Teal went on magnanimously. "You're worse than the lugs you find practicing architecture. Even the moderns, all these artists abandoned the wedding cake school in favor of the service station school, chucked away the gingerbread and slapped on some chromium. But at heart, they're as conservative and traditional as a country courthouse. Neutra, Schindler. What those bums got? What's Frank Lloyd got that I haven't got?" "Commissions," his friend answered succinctly. "Huh? What'd you say?" Teal stammered slightly in his flow of words, did a slight double take, and recovered himself. "Commission, correct. And why? Because I don't think of a house as a upholstered cave. I think it was a machine for living, a vital process, a life dynamic thing, changing with the move of the dweller, not a dead, static, overstuffed coffin. Why should we be held down by the frozen concepts of our ancestors? Any fool with a little smattering of descriptive geometry can design a house in the ordinary way. Is the static geometry of Euclid the only mathematics? Are we to completely disregard the Picard-Vichois theory? How about modular systems, say nothing of the rich suggestions of stereochemistry? Isn't there a place in architecture for transformation, for actional structures?" "Blessed if I know," answered Bailey. "Might as well be talking about the fourth dimension for all it means to me." "And why not? Why should we limit ourselves to the... Say..." He interrupted himself and stared off into the distance. "Homer, I think you've really got something. After all, why not? Think of the infinite richness of articulation and relationships in 4 dimensions. What a house, what a house." He stood quite still, his pale, bulging eyes blinking thoughtfully. Bailey reached out and shook his arm. "Snap out of it. What the hell are you talking about, 4th dimensions? Time is the 4th dimension. You can't drive nails into that." Teal shrugged him off. Sure. Time is a 4th dimension. I think about a 4th spatial dimension, like length, breadth, and thickness. For economy of materials and convenience of arrangement, you couldn't beat it. To say nothing of the saving of ground space. You can put an 8-room house on the land now occupied by a 1-room house. Like a tesseract. What's a tesseract? Didn't you go to school? Tesseract is a hypercube, a square figure with 4 dimensions to it. Like a cube has 3 and a square has 2. Here, I'll show you. Teal dashed out of the kitchen of his apartment and returned with a box of toothpicks, which he spilled on the table between them, brushing glasses and a nearly empty Holland gin bottle carelessly aside. I need some plasticine. Had some around here last week. He burrowed into a drawer of a littered desk which cluttered one corner of his dining room, and emerged with a lump of oily sculptor's clay. Here's some. What are you going to do? I'll show you. Teal rapidly pinched off small masses of the clay and rolled them into pea-sized balls. He stuck toothpicks into 4 of these and hooked it together into a square. There, that's a square. Obviously. Another one like it, form with toothpicks, and we make a cube. The toothpicks now arranged in the framework of a square box, a cube, with the pellets of clay holding the corners together. Then we make another cube just like the first one, and the 2 of them will be 2 sides of the tesseract. Viola started to help him roll the little balls of clay for the second time, but became diverted by the sensuous feel of the docile clay and started working and shaping it with his fingers. Look, he said, holding up his efforts, a tiny figurine. Gypsy Rose Lee. Looks more like Gargantua, if you ought to sue you. Now pay attention. You open up one corner of the first cube, interlock the second cube at the corner, and then close the corner. You take 8 more toothpicks and join the bottom of the first cube to the bottom of the second, on a slant, and the top of the first to the top of the second the same way. This he did rapidly while he talked. What's that supposed to be? Bailey demanded suspiciously. That's a tesseract, 8 cubes forming the size of a hypercube in 4 dimensions. Looks more like a cat's cradle to me. You've only got 2 cubes there anyway. What are the other 6? Use your imagination, man. Consider the top of the first cube in relation to the top of the second. That's cube number 3. And the 2 bottom squares, then the front faces of each cube, the back faces, the right hand, the left hand. 8 cubes. Point them out. Yeah, I see them, but they still aren't cubes. They're, whatchamacallums, prisms. They're not square, they slant. That's just the way you look at it, in perspective. If you draw a picture of a cube on a piece of paper, the side squares would be slot-lines, wouldn't they? That's perspective. When we look at a 4-dimensional figure in 3 dimensions, naturally it looks crooked. But those are cubes just the same. Maybe they are to you, brother, but they still look crooked to me. Teal ignored the objections and went on. Now consider this is the framework of an 8-room house. There's 1 room on the ground floor, of service, utilities, and garage. 6 rooms opening off on the next floor, living room, dining room, bath, bedroom, and so forth. Up at the top, completely enclosed and with windows on the 4 sides, is your study. There, how do you like it? Seems to me you have the bathtub hanging out of the living room ceiling. Those rooms are interlaced like an octopus. Only in perspective, only in perspective. Here, do another way so you can see it. This time Teal made a cube of toothpicks. They made a second of halves of toothpicks and set it exactly at the center of the first by attaching the corners of the small cube to the large cube by short lengths of toothpick. Now the big cube is your ground floor, the little cube inside is your study on the top floor. 6 cubes joining in the living room, see? Billy studied the figure and then shook his head. I still don't see but 2 cubes, a big one and a little one. Those other 6 things look like pyramids inside instead of prisms, but they still aren't cubes. Certainly, you're seeing them in a different perspective. Can't you see that? Well, maybe. But the room on the inside there is completely surrounded by the, thingamabugs. It's like you say it had windows on 4 sides. It has. Just looks like it was surrounded. That's the grand feature about a tesseract house. Complete outside exposure for every room, yet every wall serves 2 rooms, and an 8-room house requires only a 1-room foundation. It's revolutionary. That's putting it mildly. You're crazy, bud. You can't build a house like that. Each room is on the inside, and there she stays. Teal looked at his friend and controlled exasperation. It's guys like you to keep architecture in its infancy. How many square size is a cube? 6. How many are inside? Well, none of them. They're all on the outside. Alright, now listen. Tesseract has 8 cubical sides, all on the outside. Now watch me. I'm going to open up this tesseract like you can open up a cubical pasteboard box until it's flat. That way you'll be able to see all 8 of the cubes. Working very rapidly, he constructed 4 cubes, applying one on top of the other in an unsteady tower. Then built up 4 more cubes from the 4 exposed faces of the second cube in the pile. The structure swayed a little on the loose coupling of the clay pellets, but it stood. 8 cubes in an inverted cross, a double cross, as the 4 additional cubes stuck out in 4 directions. You see it now? Rest on the ground floor room, next 6 cubes in the living rooms, and there's your study up at the top. Bailey regarded it with more approval than they had the other figures. This thing I understand it. You say that's a tesseract too? That's a tesseract unfolded in 3 dimensions. To put it back together, you tuck the top cube onto the bottom cube, fold those side cubes in so they meet the top cube, and there you are. The old is folding into a 4th dimension, of course. You don't distort any of the cubes or fold them into each other. Bailey studied the wobbly framework further. Look here, he said at last. Why don't you forget about folding this thing up to a 4th dimension? You can't anyway, and build a house like this. What do you mean I can't? It's a simple mathematical problem. Take it easy, son. Maybe simple in mathematics, but you never get your plans approved for construction. There's no need 4th dimension, forget it. But this kind of a house might have some advantages. Checked. Teal studied the model. If you got something. It has to have the same number of rooms, and we save the same amount of ground space. Yeah, we can set that middle cross-shaped floor northeast, southwest, and so forth. Every room will get sunlight all day long. The central axis lends itself nicely to central heating. Put the dining room in the northeast and the kitchen in the southeast with big view windows in every room. Okay, Homer, I'll do it. Where do you want it built? Wait a minute. Didn't say you were going to build for me. Of course I am. Who else? Your wife wants a new house. This is it. Mrs. Bailey wants a Georgian house. Just an idea she has. Women don't know what they want. Mrs. Bailey does. Just some idea an out-of-date architect has put in her head. She drives a new car, doesn't she? She wears the same very latest styles. Why should she live in an 18th century house? This house will be even later than this year's model. It's years in the future. She'll be the talk of the town. Well, I'll have to talk to her. Nothing of the sort. We'll surprise her with it. Have another drink. Anyway, you can't do anything about it now. Mrs. Bailey and I are driving out to Bakersfield tomorrow. Nonsense. That's just the opportunity we want. I'll be surprised for you when you get back. Just write me a check right now and your worries are over. I oughtn't do anything like this without consulting her. She won't like it. Say, who wears the pants in your family anyway? The check was signed about halfway down the second bottle. Things are done fast in Southern California. Ordinary houses there are usually built in a month's time. Under Teal's and passionate heckling, the tesseract house climbed dizzily skyward in days rather than weeks, and this cross-shaped second story came jutting out in the 4 corners of the world. I troubled first with the inspectors over these 4 projecting rooms by using strong girders and folding money, be able to convince them of the soundness of his engineering. By arrangement, Teal drove them up in the front of the Bailey residence the morning after their return to town. He improvised on his 2-tone horn. Bailey stuck his head out the front door. Why don't you use the bell? Too slow, answered Teal cheerfully. I'm a man of action. Is Mrs. Bailey ready? Ah, there you are, Mrs. Bailey. Welcome home. You go. Jump in. We got a surprise for you. You know Teal, my dear. Bailey put in uncomfortably. Mrs. Bailey sniffed. I know him. We'll go in our own car, Homer. Certainly, my dear. Good idea, Teal agreed. It's got more power than mine. We'll get there faster. I'll drive. I know the way. Took the keys from Bailey, slid the driver's seat, and had the engine started before Mrs. Bailey could rally her forces. You don't have to worry about my driving, he assured Mrs. Bailey, turning his head as he did so, while he shot the powerful car down the avenue and swung onto Sunset Boulevard. It's a matter of power and control, a dynamic process, just my meat. Never had a serious accident. You wouldn't have but one, she said blandly. Will you please keep your eyes on the traffic? Attempt to explain to her a traffic situation was a matter not of eyesight, but intuitive investigation of courses, speeds, and probabilities, but Bailey cut him short. Where's the house, Quintus? House? Asked Mrs. Bailey suspiciously. What's this about a house, Homer? Have you been up to something without telling me? Teal came in with his best diplomatic manner. Certainly is a house, Mrs. Bailey. What a house. Surprise to you from a devoted husband. Just wait till you see it. I shall, she agreed grimly. What style is it? This house sets a new style. It's later on the television, newer than next week. Must be seen to appreciate it. By the way, he went on rapidly, heading off any retort, did you folks feel the earthquake last night? Earthquake? What earthquake? Homer, was there an earthquake? Just a little one, Teal continued. About 2 a.m. If I hadn't been awake, I would have noticed it. Mrs. Bailey shuddered. Oh, this awful country. Hear that, Homer? Might have been killed in our beds and never known it. Wonder if I ever let you persuade me to leave Iowa. But, my dear, he protested hopelessly, you wanted to come out to California. You didn't like Des Moines. We didn't go into that, she said firmly. You're a man. You should anticipate such things. Earthquakes. It's one thing I didn't fear near your home, Mrs. Bailey, Teal told her. It's absolutely earthquake-proof. Every part is in perfect dynamic balance with every other part. Well, I hope so. Where's this house? Just around this bend. There's a sign now. A large arrow sign, of the sort favored by real estate proponents, proclaimed in letters that were large and bright, even for Southern California. The house of the future. Colossal, amazing, revolutionary. See how your grandchildren will live. Q. Teal, architect. Of course, that will be taken down, he added hastily, noting her expression, as soon as you take possession. He slewed round the corner and brought the car to a squealing halt in front of the house of the future. Viola! He watched their faces for response. Bailey stared unbelievably. Mrs. Bailey in open dislike. They saw a simple cubical mass, possessing doors and windows, but no other architectural features, save it was decorated in intricate mathematical designs. Teal, Bailey asked slowly, what have you been up to? Teal turned from their faces to the house. Gone was the crazy tower with its jutting second-story room. No trace remained of the seven rooms above ground floor level. Nothing remained but a single room that rested on the foundations. Great jumping cats, he yelled. I've been robbed! He broke into her room. But it did no good. Front or back, the story was the same. The other 7 rooms had disappeared, vanished completely. Bailey caught up with him and took his arm. Explain yourself. What's this about being robbed? Couldn't you build anything like this? Not according to our agreement. But I didn't. I built just what we had planned to build. An 8-room house in the form of the developed tesseract. I've been sabotaged, that's what it is. Jealousy. The architects in town didn't dare let me finish the job, and it would be washed up if I did. When were you last here? Yesterday afternoon. Everything all right then? Yes, the gardeners were just finishing up. Bailey glanced around at the faultlessly manicured landscaping. I don't see how 7 rooms could have been dismantled and carried away from here in a single night without wrecking this garden. Teal looked around. Doesn't look like it. I don't understand it. Mrs. Bailey joined them. Well? Am I to be left to amuse myself? Might as well look it over as long as we are here, though I'm warning you, Homer, I'm not going to like it. You might as well, agreed Teal, and drew a key from his pocket with which he let them in the front door. Maybe pick up some clues. The entrance hall was in perfect order. The sliding screen that separated from the garage space were back, permitting them to see the entire compartment. This looks all right, observed Bailey. Let's go up on the roof and try to figure out what happened. Where's the staircase? Am I still on that too? Oh no, Teal denied. Look. Press the button below the light switch. A panel in the ceiling fell away, and a light, graceful flight of stairs swung noiselessly down. Its strength mirrors with a frosty silver of duralanium. Its treads and risers transparent plastic. Teal wriggled like a boy who successfully performed a card trick, while Mrs. Bailey thawed perceptibly. It was beautiful. Pretty slick, Bailey admitted. However, it doesn't seem to go anyplace. Oh, that. Teal followed his gaze. The cover lifts up as you approach the top. Open stairwells are anachronisms. Come on. As predicted, the lid of the staircase got out of the way as they climbed the flight and permitted them to debouch at the top, not as they expected on the roof of the single room. They found themselves standing in the middle of one of the 5 rooms which constituted the 2nd floor of the original structure. For the first time on record, Teal had nothing to say. Bailey echoed him, chewing on his cigar. Everything was in perfect order. Before them, through open doorway and translucent partition, lay the kitchen, a chef's dream of up-to-the-minute domestic engineering. Metal, continuous counter space, concealed lighting, functional arrangement. On the left, the formal yet gracious, hospitable dining room awaited guests, its furniture in parade ground alignment. Teal knew before he turned his head the drawing room and lounge would be found in equally substantial and impossible existence. Well, I must admit, this is charming, Mrs. Bailey approved, and the kitchen is just too quaint for words. Never would have guessed from the interior that this house has so much room upstairs. Of course, some changes will have to be made. That secretary now, if you moved it over here and put the settee over there... Stow it, Matilda. Bailey cut in brusquely. What do you make of it, Teal? Why, Homer Bailey, the very idea... Stow it, I said. Well, Teal? The architect shuffled his rambling body. I'm afraid to say. It's going up. How? Like this. He touched another button. A mate, in deeper colors, to the fairy bridge that led from below, offered them access to the next floor. They climbed it. Mrs. Bailey, expostulating in the rear, found themselves in the master bedroom. Its shades were drawn, as had been those on the level below, but the mellow lighting came on automatically. Teal at once activated the light switch, which controlled still another flight of stairs, and they hurried up into the top floor study. Look, Teal, suggested Billy when he had caught his breath. Can we get to the roof above this room? Then we go look around. Sure, it's an observation platform. They climbed the fourth flight of stairs. When the corner at the top lifted to let them reach the level above, they found themselves, not on the roof, but standing on the ground floor room where they had entered the house. Mr. Bailey turned a sickly gray. Angel in heaven, he cried. This place is haunted. We're getting out of here. Grabbing his wife, he threw open the front door and plunged out. T was much too preoccupied to bother with their departure. It was an answer to all this, an answer he did not believe. He was forced to break off, considering it, because of hoarse shouts from somewhere above him. He lowered the staircase and rushed upstairs. Billy was in the central room, leaning over Mrs. Bailey, who had fainted. Teal took in the situation, went to the bar bench into the lounge, and poured 3 fingers of brandy, which he returned with and handed to Bailey. Here, this'll fix her up. Bailey drank it. That was for Mrs. Bailey, said Teal. Don't quibble, snapped Bailey. Get her another. Teal took the precaution of taking one himself before returning with a dose earmarked for his client's wife. He found her just opening her eyes. Here, Mrs. Bailey, he soothed. This'll make you feel better. I never touched spirits, he protested, and gulped it. Now tell me what happened, suggested Teal. I thought you two had left. But we did. We walked out the front door and found ourselves up here in the lounge. The hell you say? Wait a minute. Teal went into the lounge. There he found the big view window of the engine room was open. He peered cautiously through it. He stared, not at the California countryside, but into the ground floor room, or reasonable facsimile thereof. He said nothing, but went back to the stairwell which he left open and looked down. The ground floor room was still in place. Somehow he managed to be in 2 different places at once, on different levels. He came back to the central room and seated himself opposite Bailey in a deep, low chair, and sided him past his upthrust bony knees. Homer, he said impressively, do you know what has happened? No, I don't. But if I don't find out pretty soon, something's going to happen, and pretty drastic, too. Homer, is the vindication of my theories. This house is a real tesseract. What you talking about, Homer? Wait, Matilda. Now, Teal, that's ridiculous. You pulled some hanky-panky here, and I won't have it. Scaring Mrs. Bailey half to death and making me nervous. All I wanted is to get out of here. No more of your trapdoors and silly practical jokes. Speak for yourself, Homer, Mrs. Bailey interrupted. I was not frightened. Just took over all queer for a moment. It's my heart. All my people are delicate and high-strung. How about this Tessie thing? Explain yourself, Mr. Teal. Speak up. He told her as well as he could, in the face of the numerous interruptions, the theory back of the house. Now, as I see it, Mrs. Bailey, he concluded, this house, while perfectly stable in 3 dimensions, was not stable in 4 dimensions. I built a house in the shape of an unfolded tesseract. Something happened to it, some jar or side thrust, and it collapsed into its normal shape. It folded up. He snapped his fingers suddenly. I've got it. The earthquake. Earthquake? Yes, the little shape we had last night. From a 4-dimensional standpoint, this house was like a plane balanced on edge. One little push and it fell over, collapsed along its natural joints into a stable 4-dimensional figure. I thought you'd boast about how safe this house was. It is safe. 3-dimensionally. I don't call a house safe, commented Bailey edgily. The glasses are the first little timber. Look around you, man, Teal protested. Nothing be disturbed, not a piece of glassware cracked. Rotating to the 3rd dimension can't affect a 3-dimensional figure any more than you can shape letters off a printed page. You've been sleeping in here last night, you would never have awakened. Just what I was afraid of. Incidentally, has your great genius figured out any way for us to get out of this booby trap? Huh? Oh, yes. You and Mrs. Bailey started to leave and landed back up here, didn't you? But sure, it's no real difficulty. If we go in, we can get out. I'll try it. He was up and hurrying downstairs before he'd finished talking. He flung open the front door, stepped through, and found himself staring his companions down the length of the 2nd-floor lounge. Well, there does be some slight problem, he admitted blandly. Mere technicality, though. We can always go out a window. He jerked aside the long drapes that covered the deep French window set in one side of the wall. He stopped suddenly. He said, this is very interesting. What is it? Asked Bailey, joining him. This. The window stared directly into the dining room instead of looking outdoors. Billy stepped back to the corner where the lounge and the dining room joined the central room at 90 degrees. But that can't be, protested. That window is maybe 15, 20 feet from the dining room. Not a tesseract, corrected Teal. Watch. He opened the window and stepped through, talking back over his shoulder as he did so. From the point of view of the Baileys, he simply disappeared. But not from his own viewpoint. It took him some seconds to catch his breath. Then he cautiously disentangled himself from the rosebush, to which he had become almost irrevocably wedded, making a mental note the while never again to order landscaping which involves plants with thorns, and looked around him. He was outside the house, the massive bulk of the ground floor thrust up beside him. Apparently he had fallen off the roof. Just around the corner of the house, flung open the front door, and hurried up the stairs. "Homer," he called out. "Mrs. Bailey, I found a way out." Bailey looked annoyed, rather than pleased to see him. "What happened to you?" "I fell out. Went inside the house. You can see just as easily. Just stepped through those French windows. Mind the rosebud, though. We may have to build another stairway. How'd you get back in?" "To the front door." "Then we shall live the same way. Come, my dear." Bailey set his hat firmly on his head and marched down the stairs, his wife on his arm. Teal met them in the lounge. "Could have told you that wouldn't work," he announced. "Here's what we have to do. As I see it, in a fourth-dimensional figure, a three-dimensional man has two choices every time he crosses a line of juncture, like a wall or threshold. Ordinarily, he will make a 90-degree turn to the fourth dimension, when he doesn't feel with his three dimensions. Look." He stepped to the very window he had fallen out of a moment before, stepped through and arrived in the dining room, where he stood, still talking. "I watched where I was going and arrived where I intended to." He stepped back in the lounge. "The time before I didn't watch and moved through normal space and fell out of the house. Must be a matter of subconscious orientation. Hate to depend on subconscious orientation when I step up on the morning paper. You won't have to. It'll become automatic. Now to get out of your house this time, Mrs. Bailey, if you'll stand here with your back to the window and jump backwards, I'm pretty sure you will land on the garden." Mrs. Bailey expressed her opinion of Teal and his ideas. "Homer Bailey," she said shrilly, "going to stand there, let him suggest such—" "But Mrs. Bailey," Teal explained, "we can tie a rope on you and lower you down easy—" "Forget it, Teal." Bailey cut him off brusquely. "Had to find a better way than that. Neither Mrs. Bailey nor I are fitted for jumping." Teal was temporarily nonplussed. There ensued a short silence. Bailey broke it with, "Did you hear that, Teal?" "Hear what?" "Someone talking over the distance. Suppose it could be someone else in the house, playing tricks on us, maybe?" "No, not a chance. I've got the only key." "But I'm sure of it," Mrs. Bailey confirmed. "Heard them ever since we came in. Voices. Homer, I can't stand much more of this. Do something." Now, Mrs. Bailey," Teal soothed. "Don't get upset. It can't be anyone else in the house, but I'll explore and make sure. Homer, you stay here with Mrs. Bailey and keep an eye on the rooms on this floor." Passed from the lounge to the ground floor room, and from there to the kitchen and into the bedroom. This led him back to the lounge by a straight-line route. That is to say, by going straight ahead on the entire trip, he returned to the place from which he started. "Nobody around," he reported. "Opened all the doors and windows I went, all except this one." He stepped to the window opposite the ones to which he had recently fallen, and thrust back the drapes. Saw a man with his back towards him, 4 rooms away. Teal snatched open the French window and dived through it, shouting, "There he goes now! Stop! Thief!" The figure evidently heard him. It fled. Teal pursued, his gangly limbs stirred to unanimous activity, through drawing room, kitchen, dining room, lounge, room after room. Yet in spite of Teal's best efforts, he could not seem to cut down the 4-room lead that the interloper had started with. He saw the pursued jump awkwardly but actively over the low sill of a French window, and in so doing knock off his hat. When he came to the point where his quarry had lost his headgear, he stopped and picked it up, glad of an excuse to stop and catch his breath. He was back in the lounge. "I guess he got away from me," he admitted. "Anyway, here's his hat. Maybe we can identify him." Bailey took the hat, looked at it, and snorted and slapped it on Teal's head. It fit perfectly. Teal looked puzzled, took the hat off, and examined it. On the sweatband were the initials QT. It was his own. Slowly, comprehension filtered through Teal's features. Went back to the French window and gazed down the series of rooms from which he pursued the mysterious stranger. They saw him wave his arms semaphore fashion. "What are you doing?" asked Bailey. "Come see." The two joined him and followed his stare with their own. 4 rooms away, they saw the back of 3 figures, 2 male and 1 female. The taller, thinner of the men was waving his arms in a silly fashion. Mrs. Bailey screamed and fainted again. Some time later, when Mrs. Bailey had been resuscitated and somewhat composed, Bailey and Teal took stock. Teal, said Bailey, wasting any time blaming you. Recriminations are useless. I'm sure you didn't plan for this to happen. I suppose you realize we are in a pretty serious predicament. How are we going to get out of here? It looks now as if we'd stay until we starve, if a room leads into another room. Oh, it's not that bad. I got out of it once, you know. Yeah, but you can't repeat it. You tried. You know, we haven't tried all the rooms. There's still the study. Oh, yes, the study. We went through there when we first came in and it didn't stop. Is your idea we might get out through its windows? Don't get your hopes up. Mathematically, we'd ought to look in the 4 side rooms on this floor. Still, we never opened the drapes. Maybe we ought to look. Won't do any harm, anyhow. Dear, I think you'd best stay here and rest. Be left alone in this horrible place? I should say not. Mrs. Bailey was up off the couch where she had been recuperating even as she spoke. They went upstairs. This is the inside room, isn't it, Teal? Bailey inquired as they passed through the master bedroom and quite on towards the study. I mean, the little cube that was in the diagram in the middle of the big cube and completely surrounded. That's right, agreed Teal. Let's have a look. Figured this window ought to give into the kitchen. He grabbed the cords of Venetian blinds and pulled them. It did not. Waves of vertigo shook them. Involuntarily they fell to the floor and gasped helplessly at the pattern on the rug to keep from falling. Close it, moaned Bailey. Mastering in part a primitive atavistic fear, Teal worked his way back to the window and managed to release the screen. The window looked down instead of out, down from a terrifying height. Mrs. Bailey had fainted again. Teal went back after more brandy while Bailey chafed her wrist. When she'd recovered, Bailey went cautiously to the window and raised the screen a crack. Bracing his knees, he studied the scene. He turned to Bailey. Come and look at this, Homer. See if you recognize it. You stay away from there, Homer Bailey. Now, Matilda, I'll be careful. Bailey joined him and peered out. See up there? That's the Chrysler Building, sure as shooting. There's the East River and Brooklyn. They gazed down the straight face of an enormously tall building. More than 1,000 feet, a toy city, very much alive, was spread out before them. As far as I can figure out, we're looking down the side of the Empire State Building from a point just above its tower. I don't think so. It's too perfect. I think a space is folded over through the 4th dimension here, and we're looking past the fold. You mean we aren't really seeing it? No, we're seeing it all right. Don't know what would happen if I climbed up this window, but I, for one, don't want to try. But what a view. Oh, boy, what a view. Let's try the other windows. They approached the next window more cautiously, which was well they did, for it was even more disconcerting, more reason-shaking than the one looking down the gaping heights of the skyscraper. It was a simple seascape, open ocean and blue sky, but the ocean was where the sky should be, and contrariwise. This time they were somewhat braced for it, but they both felt sea thickness about to overcome them at the sight of waves rolling overhead. They lowered the blind quickly, like giving Mrs. Bailey a chance to be disturbed by it. Teal looked at the 3rd window. Can I try it, Homer? Don't be satisfied if we don't. Take it easy. Teal lifted the blind a few inches. He saw nothing and raised it a little more. Still nothing. Slowly he raised it until the window was fully exposed. They gazed at nothing. Nothing at all. What color is nothing? Don't be silly. What shape is it? Shape is an attribute of something. It was neither depth nor form, not even blackness. It was nothing. Bailey chewed a cigar. Teal, when you make it that? Teal was shaken for the first time. I don't know, Homer. I don't rightly know. But I think that window ought to be walled up. He stared at the lowered blind for a moment. I think maybe I looked at a place where space isn't. I looked around the 4th dimensional corner. There wasn't anything there. Rubbed his eyes. I've got a headache. They waited for a while before tackling the 4th window. Like an unopened letter, it might not contain bad news. The doubt left hope. Finally, the suspense snapped too thin, and Bailey probed the cord himself in the face of his wife's protests. It was not so bad. The landscape stretched away from them, right side up, on such a level the study appeared to be on a ground-floor room, but it was distinctly unfriendly. A hot sun beat down from lemon-colored sky. The flat ground seemed burned to sterile, bleached ground and incapable of supporting life. Life there was, strangely stunted trees that lifted knotted, twisted arms to the sky, little clumps of spiky leaves growing the outer extremities of these misshapen growths. Heavenly Dale, breathed Bailey. What is it? Tail shook his head, his eyes troubled. Beats me. Doesn't look anything like Earth. Looks more like another planet. Mars, maybe. I wouldn't know. But you know, Homer, it might be worse than that. Worse than another planet, I mean. What's that you say? Might be cleared out of space entirely. Not sure it's our side at all. Seems too bright. Homer, Mrs. Bailey had somewhat timidly joined them and now gazed out at the ultra scene. Homer, she said in a subdued voice, those hideous trees, they frighten me. She patted her hand. Teal fumbled with the window catch. What are you doing? Bailey demanded. Not if I stuck the head out the window, I might be able to look around and to tell a bit more. Well, all right. Bailey grudged, but be careful. I will. He opened the window a crack and sniffed it. The air was all right, at least. He threw it open wide. His attention was diverted before he could carry out his plan. An uneasy tremor, like the first intimation of nausea, shivered the entire building for a long second and was gone. Earthquake! They all said at once. Mrs. Bailey flung her arm around her husband's neck. Teal gulped and recovered himself, saying, It's all right, Mrs. Bailey, the house is perfectly safe. You can expect settling tremors of a shock like last night. He just settled features of expression of reassurance when the second shot came. This one was no mild shimmy, but a real seasick roll. In every Californian, native born or grafted, there is a deep-rooted primitive reflex. Earthquake fills him with soul-shaking claustrophobia, which compels him blindly to get outdoors. Model Boy Scouts will push aged grandmothers aside to obey it. It's a matter of record that tailing Mrs. Bailey landed on top of Mrs. Bailey. Therefore, she must have jumped through the window first. The order of precedence cannot be attributed to chivalry. It must be assumed she was in a readier position to spring. They pulled themselves together, collected their wits a little, and rubbed signs from their eyes. The first sensation was relief at feeling the solid sound of the desert land under them. Then Bayless noticed something that brought them to their feet and checked Mrs. Bailey from bursting into the speech she had ready. Where's the house? It was gone. There was no sign of it at all. They stood in the center of flat desolation, the landscape they'd seen from the window. But aside from the tortured, twisted trees, there was nothing to see but the yellow sky and the luminary overhead, whose furnace-like glare was already almost insufferable. Bill looked slowly around and shrugged the architect. Well, Teal? His voice was ominous. Teal shrugged helplessly. I wish I knew. Wish I could even be sure we were on Earth. Well, we can't stand here. Sure death if we do. Which direction? Any, I guess. Let's keep a bearing on the sun. They trudged on for an undetermined distance when Mrs. Bailey demanded a rest. They stopped. Teal sat aside to Bailey. Any ideas? No, none. Say, did you hear something? Teal listened. Maybe, unless it's my imagination. Sounds like an automobile. Say, it is an automobile. They came to the highway in less than another 100 yards. The automobile, when it arrived, proved to be an elderly, puffing light truck, driven by a rancher. He crashed to a stop at their hail. We're stranded. Can you help us out? Sure, pile in. Where are you headed? Los Angeles. Los Angeles? Say, where is this place? Boy, you're right in the middle of the Joshua Tree National Forest. The return was as dispiriting as the retreat from Moscow. Mr. and Mrs. Bailey sat in front of the driver while Teal bumped along in the back of the truck and tried to protect his head from the sun. Bailey subsidized the friendly rancher to detour to the Tesseract house, not because they wanted to see it again, but in order to pick up their car. On the west, the rancher turned the corner that brought them back where they'd started. But the house was no longer there. It was not even the ground floor room. It had vanished. The Baileys, interested in spite of themselves, poked around the foundations with Teal. Got any answers for this one, Teal? Asked Bailey. Must be in that last shock. It simply flows through another section of space. I can see now I should have anchored the foundations. That's not all you should have done. Well, I don't think there's anything to get downhearted about. The house was insured. We've learned an amazing lot. There are possibilities, man. Possibilities. Why, right now I've got a great new revolutionary idea for a house. Teal ducked in time. He was always a man of action. The end.